So is it literally 20 seconds? Hey, that's me. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Weird Tales Out of Copyright event. This is the first library live streaming event. Thank you for experimenting with us and being with us. My name is Kretz. I'm the head of academic engagement here at the library, and I'm here to kick things off and keep them moving. So, to start, autumn is here, and the leaves are falling, and the darkness and the cold is creeping closer every day, a little bit more. So it's only natural that our minds turn to thoughts of the supernatural and to questions about US copyright law. Did you know, for instance, that your copyright in a creative work will last for the life of the author plus 70 years? And that whoever the author is or who they assign the copyright to, they control how that work is produced or distributed or used? And if you're a corporation like Disney, all the works created for you, you control how they're adapted or produced or distributed for 120 years from the date they were created, or 95 years from when they were first published, whichever comes first. But there's a place where, in the fullness of time, all these creative works go when they die. It's a nebulous place. It's not really a place. It's a transparent dimension called the public domain. And basically, any creative work that is in the public domain is available for anyone to use. So you can make it into a movie, adapt it into graphic novel form, create an opera, print your own edition, write a sequel. The only limit is your imagination. The law is a bit complicated, but to simplify it, you can think of it at the moment that anything published before 1925 right now is in the public domain. And that timeline shifts. So every year, the clock jumps forward, and next year, everything published before 1926 will be in the public domain, which includes The Great Gatsby. So think of it sort of as a copyright daylight savings time. Every year, the public domain jumps forward 1 year. So to celebrate that and to highlight Halloween, we're here to do some adapting of our own. We've unearthed 4 stories and a poem of the appropriate age, all from the Weird Tales magazine, which was a pulp fiction magazine started in 1923, famous for its stories about monsters and werewolves and elder gods and mad scientists. So we've turned these stories into scripts that we're going to read for you today. By the end of the event, I will introduce all of our readers. For now, you can keep your eye on the chat in YouTube. We'll drop some footnotes and information for you. But for our first story, it comes from the spring 1924 issue by H. Francis Caskey, an author about whom little is known, other than this is the only story they ever published in the magazine. So all we can tell you that it is very appropriately entitled The Hand.
You still don't know how it happened. The key fit the door perfectly. The door unlocked. So there was nothing to warn you that you were walking into the wrong hotel room.
I had just come back from the business conference, had just given my big keynote speech. I guess I was thinking about what I said, what I had gotten to say.
You discover later that you had gotten off on the wrong floor and gone to the room directly beneath your own.
The unbelievable thing I saw when I opened the door was too astonishing, too weird, too utterly monstrous for credits.
Facing you from the far side of a small table sat a huge man, a dominating man, with features strong and severe as those of any ancient Roman emperor. He bulked large behind the table, like some great figure of Buddha, impressive and awe-inspiring in his quiet forcefulness. He was coatless, and his immaculate sleeves were turned back to the elbows on 2 powerful arms.
But what held me spellbound lay on the table, seeming by its horrible, actually to freeze the blood within me, inhibiting my powers of speech and motion, while in the brilliant light, clean and snowy, and were it not for the ghastly story it told, even alluring. Great God, I am dreaming.
A girl sat there, a girl whose beauty, whose every feature will go with you to the grave. And the smile on the face of the beautiful girl terrified you. It was all too revolting, too ghoulish, too sickening for credence, except to a dethroned reason.
On the gleaming, polished wood of the table, in almost the exact center within reach of any of us in this room, lay, my God, can I ever forget it? A woman's hand.
A woman's hand, cleanly severed at the wrist, a flashing diamond sparkling from the platinum mounting on the third finger, each well-kept nail gleaming pinkly in mute testimonial of much studied care. It was a grisly exhibit, well calculated to stun the mind of any normal witness.
A woman's hand. Was it a dream? No, except for a numbered horror. I was never more fully awake. No, it was not a dream. Would to God it were, that time might erase the sleep-destroying memory from my brain.
You are just in time, Mr. Farrell, to witness a revolutionary performance in modern surgery. This liquid is the most complete and marvelous anesthetic ever dreamed of. When imbibed, it instantly kills every nerve, halts every drop of blood, so that even an amputation may be performed under the eyes of the patient with never a sense of pain nor feeling. It causes skin to heal hygienically so that any operation may be performed and recovery assured with an amazingly short period of time. As a matter of fact, that extremity was removed not just 5 minutes before you came in.
Perhaps Mr. Farrell would care to make a closer examination of the subject before witnessing the next operation?
Another operation? My God, no. I will not be a witness to such monstrous malpractice.
Mr. Farrell, being a layman, would doubtless prefer to remain seated where he can witness what is done, unaffected so far as possible by his obviously morbid imagination.
Frida, my dear, your consent to this operation is most gratifying. You are not suffering any effects from the loss of your hand?
None whatsoever. As yet, I have not even missed it.
This is a hoax. What are you trying to do? What monstrous trick are you playing with me?
Please, take your drink, Frida, then we can begin.
I'm ready.
Excellent. Please keep perfectly still, my love. This should take half the time of the last procedure.
I'm glad to submit to these operations in the name of science.
Her eye! You're going to remove her eye!
Quiet, please. We are ready for the second operation.
No!
Sun on tap power gives you the strength to spring from your chair. In a frenzy of fear, you flee the room, racing down the hallway to the stairs, up one flight and back to your own familiar room. With a sob, you collapse and consciousness leaves you. You awake the next day at noon. But even with the wholesome sunlight streaming into the room, you shudder with remembrance of the thing that had happened. A sudden impulse, overmastering in its forcefulness, impels you to write it down.
No one will ever believe this.
You set down all that had happened, exactly as it happened, all of it still clear in your brain. When you have written down the last word, you check out of the hotel, nervously approaching the desk clerk.
Who was in the room directly under mine last night?
Let's see. You were in 507. So 407 would be, that would have been Dr. Menostique and his wife, his assistant. I mean, she's both. They checked out this morning.
Dr. Menostique? Who is Dr. Menostique?
Dr. Menostique is the shark shanks at this hypnotism thing, nutty as a tugboat. likes to put the spell on strangers and make them see snakes or something. Rotten trick to pull on a man, you ask me. They say what that fellow can make a man see is plain hell. Just be glad you were nowhere near him, bucko.
Our next story is from November 1924, and it's by Otis Adelbert Kline, a Chicago native who also wrote The Cup of Blood and The Malignant Entity. And he would go on to become the literary agent for Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan the Barbarian. For this one, we travel out west to present to you The Phantom Rider.
Big Bill felt that he had ample reason to hate Seth Ormsby. For 19 years, he had been prospecting in this region, sometimes with a partner, but more often alone. He had made occasional strikes rich enough to support him in idleness for several months at a time, but the thing that stuck in his craw was the fact that when the big strike came, the strike for which he had been hoping, toiling, and struggling for 19 years, he must share it with this green horn who couldn't tell quartz from shale.
Big Bill had gambled the best years of his life for this stake, and felt that fortune had cold-decked him when she finally dealt him one royal flush, and Ormsby the other. The two must either split the pot or leave it up for a showdown. As they rode into the town of Red Dog to file their claim, Big Bill resolved on a showdown, dealt from his own stacked deck.
Seems like we're going sort of out of the way to get to Red Dog.
Yeah, it's a long, hard ride, but this trail has a water hole down the way a bit. I reckon we let the animals wet their whistles. They've been riding hard all morning.
Right you are, Bill. I plumb forgot about the poor brutes. It's this big strike we hit, and all that gold's got me thinking out of sorts. I don't know whether I'm on horseback or riding an aeroplane half the time.
Big Bill did not reply. His eyes were on the trail ahead. They were passing side by side along a narrow ledge between the canyon wall and a muddy river, Ormsby on the outside. The time for action was almost at hand. Big Bill was wearing his poker face. The time for the showdown had arrived.
With a vicious kick, he drove his spur into the left flank of Ormsby's steed. As the horse reared, Ormsby lurched back and tumbled out of his saddle, landing with a splash in the water below.
My God, Bill, it's quicksand!
Damned if it ain't! Hold on for a minute, and I'll throw you a rope.
With studied deliberation, Bill took up the coiled lariat that tangled from his saddle. He slowly worked it loose, but seemed to be having trouble with the knots.
Hurry, Bill! For God's sake, I'm up to my waist already!
As Bill contemplated, Ormsby was up to his armpits in the slimy ooze. His horse had disappeared, but the man had managed to free his own rope.
Grab hold of my rope, Bill. I think I can crawl out on it.
The rope landed at Hawkins's feet, but Big Bill ignored it with a sly laugh.
You dirty coyote! You murdering yellow dog! I'll get you for this. If I have to break it, hell to do it!
How about that? Well, let's get a move on then. Yeah!
The blood-red sun was poised just above the western horizon when Big Bill rode into the village of Red Dog. After seeing to his animal, he removes the heavy sacks of gold dust from his saddlebags and hies to Bonnell's general store.
Hello, Bill. Where's your partner?
Skipped out a couple weeks ago for parts unknown. Took most of the grub with him too. The damn skunk. But the joke's on him. Day after he left, I struck pay dirt and staked out a nice little claim for myself. Weighing this little dust for me and fix up my papers.
You sure hit pay dirt this time, Bill. The county office ain't open till the morning. Want any cash on this or just a receipt?
Give me 100 cash and receipt for the balance. I'll file my claim in the morning. But tonight, I celebrate.
Bill ambled over to the Deerfoot Saloon for a couple of shots of whiskey as an appetizer. Then he went into the cafe, where he tucked into a huge beefsteak, a half dozen eggs, French fried potatoes, coffee, and a pecan pie.
He had often wondered how it would feel to be wealthy. He decided that the time for indulgence was at hand. He swaggered up to the bar in the Deerfoot and plucked a $20 bill on the counter.
What do you got that's good and strong, Joe?
Well, we got some Old Crow, some Archivite, and some 3-Star Hennessy.
Give me that 3-star and see what the rest of the boys here will have.
Woohoo!
Convivial companionship was not lacking after that. The motley crew of cowpunchers, prospectors, sheep herders, card sharps, and others of doubtful occupations, or no occupations at all, helped Bill drink his money. By 10:30, however, the crowd began to thin out. Some lurched out into the night. Others lay with their heads on tables or lolled back in their chairs.
Give us another drink, Joe.
You had enough, Bill. Put your money in your pocket and go on to bed.
Had enough, did I? Give me a drink.
You heard what I said. Take your money and get out.
Hey, the hell's going on in here?
Big Bill had a wholesome fear of the law. The sight of the gun and the star almost sobered him up. Panic-stricken, he rushed through the door and onto his horse.
He galloped into the night, trying to think, his head spinning. He glanced at his bruised fist, trying to remember what he had done. For the life of him, he couldn't remember. Perhaps he had killed a man? He looked back and saw a rider in hot pursuit.
What I do?
Bill urged his horse forward with renewed frenzy as the sharp clatter of hoofbeats sounded close behind him. But despite the speed he was making, the increasing distinctness of the sounds behind him told Big Bill that his pursuer was gaining on him, gaining with amazing rapidity.
He pulled his horse up quickly. As he reached the edge of the ravine, he leapt off and took shelter behind an outcropping of rock.
What I do? I did kill somebody. But that was this morning. What did our varmint say?
I'll get you for this if I have to break out of hell to do it.
Is that... No, it can't be.
The next morning, the sheriff was enjoying his paper and a cup of coffee when Joe shared the news of what had been discovered out in the ravine just after sunrise.
Where'd you find them?
Dangest thing I ever seen. Big Bill was lying at the bottom of the ravine, dead.
And who followed Big Bill out of Red Dog last night?
No one, Sheriff. I seen him saddle up and ride away alone.
There was a rope burn around his neck, but he don't seem to have no broken bones or other injuries.
Whoever got him must have rode up on him at the top of the ravine.
Well, I went up to the top of the ravine to try and find out what had happened. There was the track of Bill's horse. We had come running up.
And?
I hunted high and low and circled the place for 100 yards in every direction. There wasn't a single track of horse or man leading away from the place where Big Bill Hawkins died.
Now, we've adapted these stories from their original content, so they were basically written to be read. So there's a lot of long descriptions and narratives. So we've taken some liberties. That's what the public domain is for. So some of these have been adapted more than others. But as you heard, we've been trying to keep the that kind of anxious, overwrought style of the 1920s in a lot of this. Change some slang and things. But if you look in the chat, we'll be introducing some new slang for you if you want to bring back the 1920s in your everyday speech. The magazine blasted into the 1950s and later. Ray Bradbury, if you know that name, was publishing stories in it too. It's been revived a few different times as different people bought the copyright to it and tried to revive it. But now it is mostly remembered for this golden age of horror and fantasy stories. So next up is a short story that the magazine billed as a 5-minute tale. Came from the July-August 1923 issue. It's one of the two that we're reading today that feature stories of scientists behaving badly, which is a common theme in a lot of the weird tale stories If you're familiar with H.P. Lovecraft's The Reanimator, you might imagine what shenanigans they get up to. This one is by a Southern writer named Seymour Chunn, who wrote a lot of poetry and other works under his pseudonym Culpeper Chunn. So prepare yourselves for Dr. X.
The giant Cunard liner, the SS Princess Maritza, had just swung past Sandy Hook and in a sea as smooth as glass, was gathering speed with every revolution of her engines as she headed for European waters beneath a blazing hot sun.
We had propped up our feet on the rail and sprawled out comfortably in a pair of steamer chairs. We had the Lido deck mostly to ourselves.
The trip over looked to be, to put it bluntly, a bit monotonous, so I had found myself a pile of outdated European newspapers.
And I had my mint julep.
So we were prepared to make the most of it. Say, McCain, seems our old professor, Sven Borgen, became famous while we weren't looking. You remember him, don't you, old chum?
Sure. The old Swede who used to lecture on psychology at GWI during our last year there. He was bow-legged and had a cast on his right eye. Erratic nut. What? We used to call him Bug. What's he done now? Proclaimed himself Emperor of Taipei?
Nothing of such international concern, but he appears to have gotten himself in the limelight just the same. He delivered a paper in Stockholm some months back, claiming to have perfected an operation for grafting the brain of an animal into the cranium of another of the same species.
Oh, really? And what is Consolidated Steel quoted at this morning?
Listen to this. He claimed that he successfully performed the operation in mice, and in one case, the brain of a live dog was grafted in the cranium of a dog killed by concussion of the brain.
That's tough on the first pup.
But just a week after giving the paper, Borgen was involved in a skiing accident and instantly killed.
Lucky devil. If he had lived, he would have ended his days in a dippy house. Brain grafts? Pfft. The man had ants in his attic.
But see here, the paper says...
Bunk.
The paper says that he...
Piffle.
I'm quite sure that you are both wrong.
We turned sharply and gazed at the speaker. A woman stood directly behind our chairs and was peering over my shoulder at the newspaper I was reading. She was tall and elegantly dressed, with an elusive something about her that suggested the Scandinavian.
I don't know what piffle is, but it sounds too unkind. The story about Dr. Borgen in that paper is mostly true, if not incomplete.
And who the devil might you be?
Oh, I beg your pardon, gentlemen. I'm Elke Verborg. I'm a nurse on my way back to Europe, and I overheard your conversation as I passed. You see, I knew Dr. Borgen, and I could not let your judgment on his mental condition pass unchallenged. What was the phrase again? Ants in his attic?
It was just a figure of speech. But come now, Miss Freeborg. You honestly want us to believe that this newspaper story is based on fact?
So far as it goes, yes. But I assisted Dr. Borgen for much of his time in Sweden, and I can tell you, the true story is much more remarkable. I wonder if you would care to hear it.
I looked at McCain, who nodded, but whether in acquiescence or to order another mint julep from the passing steward, I could not tell. Our new friend took the empty chair between us, reclining with her legs crossed.
Although he was brilliant, the idea of the brain graft originated not with Professor Borgen, but with a surgeon he met abroad, a man whom we only ever addressed as Dr. X. Now, Dr. X was a brilliant surgeon and obsessed with perfecting the brain graft operation. What he lacked, however, was the professor's understanding of how the brain worked. The two met on a holiday in St. Moritz and soon began working together. With Borgen assisting the doctor and I assisting Professor Borgen, the experiments progressed more rapidly. Before too long, the brain graft was an accomplished fact in animals. We traveled to Stockholm to present our findings, but Dr. X stayed behind. He preferred to remain anonymous, so we removed all mention of him. And thus our discovery was revealed to the world.
It must have been very satisfying for old Sven. I'm glad. He was not quite as appreciated here in America.
The proudest day of his life. And even more special in that it was shared with someone he'd grown to care for. Very much.
Here's to old Bug.
But Dr. X always balked at confining the work to lower animals. He wanted to operate on more challenging subjects.
Tigers?
Human beings.
You can't be serious.
He did not suffer for lack of vision. Just think, gentlemen, what this operation, if it was successful, would mean to humanity. The possibilities.
Well, I suppose the alert brains of old men could be given a new lease on life in, say, the bodies of the young, given the right conditions. Permanent brain injuries, say?
Dr. X would speak for hours about how the mind of geniuses could be successive operations, be made to live on, perhaps, who knows, forever.
It would only be a matter of time before the human race would become a race of supermen. Deranged supermen.
Dr. X was himself a very old man, and he knew that the operation had not been perfected. The Swedish government gave us use of an abandoned lunatic asylum in the mountains where we could work undisturbed. There was progress, but also arguments about the direction we were taking. Once we discovered Dr. X disposing of a body, a villager he claimed had fallen off a ledge while climbing. We were fools not to question him further. And then, of course, it all changed.
When the professor had his accident?
We would often ski together, just the two of us, alone with the mountain and the sky. That was the only immortality I needed. But fate is cruel. We were caught in a sudden storm. We couldn't see the rocks that killed him and made my life a living hell.
Oh, you poor kid. But just think, there was nothing you could have done. It was an accident.
Sure. And he would want you to move on. Live your life and be happy.
I told you there was more to the story. Borgen's battered and lifeless body was brought back to the asylum. How she managed that, I can't imagine. And Dr. X, I'm sure all he could think of was the impact on the work. He could have never continued without Borgen's mind to guide him. I wonder, is that how he convinced her? By saying she would be ensuring his legacy? Or was it love?
I'm sorry, I don't quite follow you, Miss Freeburg.
Yeah, and what happened to that old Nutter X once Borgen was in the ground?
Well, Dr. X is waiting for me in Switzerland. We've moved our lab to an old chateau near Lake Geneva, and our work continues. You see, gentlemen, I died that day on the mountain, but so did she. Helga allowed that Dr. X to perform the operation. On her, I am... God forgive me. I am Sven Borgen.
We're coming to our last short story, which comes from the March 1924 issue of Weird Tales. And it's by C.M. Eddy Jr., who was a writer from Rhode Island, published a number of tales. He was also a booking manager for vaudeville and other theaters in the area. And he had one friend from Rhode Island, a native Rhode Island author and colleague, H.P. Lovecraft, someone who we have mentioned before, who went on to great fame with his tales of Cthulhu and elder gods and cosmic horrors. Lovecraft is a bit of a troublesome figure these days. He was well documented as prejudiced, and his writings bear that out. But his stories have gone on to great acclaim and been adapted in many different formats. What's interesting is that he and Eddy actually collaborated on a few stories, 4 in all that we know of, including the next one, which apparently Lovecraft did some revising on, although probably pretty lightly because there won't be any elder gods or cosmic horror in this one. And I'm just going to If you've been watching, we've been changing our names to our characters. So I'm just getting into character for this next story. It is a tale about the dangers and attractions of chemistry. It starts with a frantic visit to the apartment of a friend, and it's called Ashes.
What's the matter, old man? Come in. You look as if you've seen a ghost. Brace up. Drink this.
Thanks, Prague. I don't feel quite myself tonight.
You don't look it either. What's wrong? I eyed him in silence for a moment, wondering what could possibly affect the man so strongly. I knew Bruce as a man of steady nerves and iron will. To find him so visibly upset was in itself unusual.
Prague, I've been through the most devilish, gruesome experience. I don't know whether I dare tell it to you. You'll think I've gone crazy, and I wouldn't blame you if you did, but it's true, every word of it.
I smiled. I had listened to many a weird tale told by guests to my apartment. There was some kink in my personality that inspired confidence. I had been told stories that some men would have given years of their life to know. And yet, despite my love of the bizarre and the dangerous, I had been doomed to a life of prosaic, flat, uneventful business.
Do you happen to have heard of Professor Van Allister?
You don't mean Arthur Van Allister?
The same. Then you know him?
I should say so. Known him for years. Ever since he resigned as professor of chemistry at the college so he could have more time for his experiments. Why, I even helped him choose the plans for that soundproof laboratory of his on the top floor of his home. Up to a year or so ago, we were pals. Then he got so busy with his confounded experiments, he couldn't find time to be chummy.
You may recall, Prague, that when we were in college together, I used to dabble quite a bit myself in chemistry.
Quite so.
About 4 months ago, I was out of a job. Van Allister advertised for an assistant, so I answered. I managed to convince him I knew enough about chemistry to warrant a trial. He had a young lady doing his secretarial work, a Miss Marjorie Purdy. Nope, we've just got our mute there, sorry. Dharya.
I was one of those strict attention to detail types. And as good looking as I was efficient, I helped Van Allister in the lab and discovered I was good at it. I started lending a hand on more complex work.
It wasn't long, Prague, before I began to depend on her to help me in difficult experiments when the professor was busy. That girl took to chemistry as a duck takes to water.
And then, about 2 months ago, Van Allister sealed off part of the lab, made himself a separate off-limits workroom. He said he was onto something that would make him famous, but only him. He wouldn't tell us a thing.
Miss Purdy and I were left alone for days at a time without a glimpse of the professor. With more spare time on our hands, our friendship ripened. I felt a growing admiration for this young woman who seemed perfectly content to fuss around smelly bottles and sticky messes, gowned in white from head to foot, even to the rubber gloves she wore.
And then, just yesterday, Van Allister invited us into his workshop.
I have done it! This will rank as the greatest chemical discovery ever known. Watch as I prove its power right before your eyes. Bruce, bring me one of those rabbits.
Here you go.
Now to prove whether my weeks of efforts have resulted in success or failure.
He poured his experimental liquid over that poor creature, and all that was left was
a pile of fine white ash.
This concoction will instantaneously reduce anything it touches to a fine ash. Anything, well, except glass. Just think what that means. An army equipped with glass bombs that could annihilate the world. Wood, metal, stone, brick, everything turned to ash. Marble, asphalt, corrugated tin, bakelite, cardboard burlap.
He locked us out again, and I'll admit, Prague, that I was suffering a mental chill after hearing that demonstration from him, standing outside that madman's workshop. Marjorie's nerves gave way completely. She reeled and would have fallen had I not caught her in my arms.
The feel of his soft, yielding body held close to my own was the last straw. I cast prudence to the winds and crushed him lightly to my breast. Kiss after kiss, I pressed upon his full red lips until I opened my eyes and saw the love light reflected in his looking back at me.
We slowly came to our senses, back to Earth, long enough to realize that the laboratory was no such place for ardent demonstrations.
At any moment, Van Allister might come out of his retreat, and if he should discover us together in his present state of mind, we dared not think would happen.
But for the rest of that day, Prague, I was like a man in a dream, an automaton, a well-trained machine going about its appointed tasks in chemistry, while my mind soared far away into realms of delightful daydreaming. Today, along about noon, I had to run out to the drugstore to get something to finish an experiment. When I returned, Marjorie was gone. None of the servants had seen her leave. There was no message left for me. The professor was locked up in his workshop. Evening came, and I grew frantic. There was still no sign of my Marjorie. Can you imagine how I suffered, Prague? I envisioned all sorts of terrible fates overtaking her. At 7:30, Van Allister called for me.
Bruce!
There was a huge glass case in the center of his private lab, the size of a coffin, and filled with that damned colorless liquid he had invented. And on the desk beside him, a new jar filled with fine, soft ash. And then I turned, and there on a table in the corner of the lab was Marjorie's hat and her coat.
Bruce, I have a very special job for you. I want to make sure that my liquid works on dry pork. So tomorrow I want you to go down to the butcher and...
Prague, I tell you, the world stood still for one single moment. And then I went mad, stark, raving mad. I lifted a nearby umbrella stand and I knocked that old man to the ground. Then casting about, I found a mug and I scooped up some of that colorless liquid and I poured it out over his head. An unnatural chill descended upon me after that, Prague. And although I knew that no evidence of my crime existed and that no one had seen me enter that lab, still I was just numb. Numb, knowing that I would never see my true love again. And then I heard as she unmuted herself.
Hello, darling. The professor wanted to test his liquid on cashmere, so I had run all the way home for these. He thinks now he can make more money selling his liquid as a laundry cleaner. He rushed me out without my coat, and I missed the bus coming back. Say, where is the professor anyway?
Oh.
Yes.
She wasn't.
No.
But you...
Yes.
And now?
I admit I was a bit confused in the immediate aftermath. I couldn't bring myself to tell Marjorie the truth, but I felt I had to unburden myself to someone. You understand, don't you?
Yes, well, strictly speaking, it was...
I knew I could trust on you to keep a secret, old sport. I've got to run. Marjorie's out in the car. I found some silver cufflinks in the professor's nightstand. We're off to Jersey to pawn them, and then it's on to Martha's Vineyard. We warned you about those mad scientists. So we have a final poem, but before we go, I wanted to relate a few things about this whole project. And again, thank you all for joining us on the live stream. We'll have to go over the chat. We are recording this, and the hope is to have it posted for those that couldn't make it, so we can share this later. We'll keep you informed on that. I wanted to say, if you've been enjoying these readings and thinking you'd like to try it yourself, you want to check out tomorrow's literary karaoke at the library, which will be held over Zoom at 3 p.m., where you can bring your own readings and read online with others. There's registration information on our website, library.stonybrook.edu, in the events section. You just have to register and you'll get the Zoom link. And I wanted to take this chance to thank our readers. We've been rehearsing for a while, trying to get this in shape for you. Our library faculty, if you could join us, turn on your video, that would be Donna Darling, Chrstine Fena, Casten-Mutkus. Web librarian Claire Payne has been in the background running all the technology flawlessly. I also want to thank our social media interns, students Tiara Harrigan and Anthony Carl, who have been monitoring and feeding the chat. Hope you got some information that you found useful from that. And most importantly, our student readers who responded to a blind call for participants and stepped up. And I want to especially thank Smantha Fernandes, Dharya Campbell, Jade Anderson, and Olive Hamel. We couldn't have done it without them. And there were some upcoming things that they're taking part of in the chat. So if you want to follow them more in their careers, make sure to keep an eye out for them. So we kind of timed this out. We in our haste, we'll be a little early, but we hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. We're going to close out with a poem. The Weird Tales did publish a lot of poetry in between all these other weird tales. So Smantha and Donna will read from a final poem from the March 1924 issue by a man named Leonard Fohn. He had a few poems, but not much else. And this one is called The Visit of the Skulls.
The leering skulls float round my bed like lonesome yellow moons, and tell their tales of lives long sped in melancholy tunes. Each with its woes and foregone dreams displays its life to me, like some weary wandering streams that never reach the sea. But one hangs back and looks away, a soft, a scented glove. Tell me, I cried, your life, I pray.
I lied and died of love.
So again, thank you all for attending our first live stream. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something about copyright, and maybe you will adapt the next great novel from the 1920s in your own way. Claire, I think we can shut this. We can put the lights out on this one, and we will see you all somewhere out there.